Yes, well, good morning again to those miracle viewers or listeners. Through no fault of Harry's and probably every fault of mine, our attempt to get going at 10 o'clock was blocked by technical problems. But we're now live again, and it may well be that Keith, the regular anchorman, will join us at some stage, although he tells me he's not been very well over the weekend, sadly. But how are you, Harry?
Well, I'm just fine, just fine. I had a quiet weekend. I don't know quite where it went. I didn't do anything of great importance, but here I am, reached a Monday morning. I'm always grateful to reach Monday mornings at my age. So,
Well,
yeah.
you mentioned your age. My wife and I went on Saturday to a really smashing 80th birthday party of a friend and neighbour.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he looks about 60 at worst. I mean, he's fit as a fiddle. And at the party, I met his brother, who is 82, who still sails a yacht across the Atlantic and round Greenland, believe it or not. And I then met his cousin, who is the spitting image of Uncle Albert from Only Fools and Horses, also a sailor, and he was 88.
My
And
goodness.
they just finished a run down the Solent. Hello,
Mm-hmm.
Keith.
Morning.
We're sorry to hear you haven't been very well over the weekend, Keith.
No, I'm afraid I haven't. But nobody is supposed to know that except me.
Well, there again, I've been very indiscreet.
No, it's all right. I One of the things that in talking to my consultant is that the moment that you admit that you've got a problem is that's when you start to go downhill. So it's much better to be positive. And I say that I tried to run the length of Africa faster than the guy that did it, and I failed by about 5 minutes.
Yes, well done. That's not a failure. Um, that chap was from Worthing.
Was he?
Yeah. And he became homeless. He was drinking far too much and he was gambling. And in the end, he took a long, hard look at himself and said, right, you're going to do something unique for your mental health, for your self-respect, you name it. And that's what he did. The length of Africa. Now, I was just sharing with Harry as you came in. Harry expressed a level of gratitude that he feels every Monday morning when he wakes up and it's a new day at his age. Well, I went to an 80th birthday party in Arundel on Saturday with my wife, a friend and neighbour. His 80th. He looks fit as a fiddle and much younger. I met his brother, who's 82, who sails a yacht across the Atlantic up to Greenland and whatever. And then I met his cousin, who is 88, also still sails. Both of them have just done a journey down the Solent. And he was the spitting image of Uncle Albert out of Only Fools and Horses. I don't know whether you watched that program, but this guy was the spitting image of Albert, 88, bursting with energy and full good colour, and there we are. Anyway,
Well, age is a state of mind, I think. Age is a state of mind.
well,
Obviously,
when I
physically.
meet people like you and Keith,
Mm-hmm.
and then the people I met at that party, it has to be.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be.
Physical limitations are a factor, quite obviously. But I think essentially it's the mind that controls the body, and as long as you keep young in thought and you have ambitions, there's things that you wish to achieve. I think that keeps you going. I've known some very, very bright people in my life who, once they retired, just simply vegetated.
Yes.
And they seemed to go downhill very quickly. And they were among the cleverest people I've ever met. And yeah, but
Sadly, I think that's more common than not.
Yeah. But
Unfortunately.
if you keep yourself busy and you get involved, you forget your birthdays. I mean, I think it lovely to have parties and so on and so forth, but it's a great reminder. Oh my God, I'm 80. I was 84 this last birthday in November, and it passed by with me working on Mirador and barely mentioning it. In fact, not really being aware of it. So I woke up the next week to find that I was 84 plus several days. So bugger it, why bother to celebrate? Get on with it. That's a celebration.
Yeah, but others would have wanted to celebrate it with you, Keith.
Actually, they didn't show any penchant for it, so I didn't bother about it.
I mean, on the subject of the mind and the brain, Harry, it's a book you may have read, but it's a book my wife bought me, and it's a wonderful book. It's called The Well-Gardened Mind.
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Well, it's a book written by, obviously, a psychiatrist, psychologist, but it's an analogy with gardening.
Okay.
Because the brain works in a way like a gardener does.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the most astonishing read. If you can get hold of it, or I can get it and send it to you if you like, but it is a really fascinating read.
Okay. Give it the title again. What's it called?
The Well-Gardened Mind.
The Well-Gardened Mind. Okay.
After this, I'll send you a link.
Okay.
I mean, do you use Amazon in France?
Use which one?
Amazon.
Oh yes, we do indeed. Yeah, it's big, big thing over here.
Do you use Amazon?
Yes, we do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Well, it's on Amazon, The Well-Gardened Mind, but I'll send you the link.
I'll find it then. Don't worry, I'll find it. Mm-hmm.
And it entirely confirms and more what you're saying. That I mean, the brain is an extraordinary organ. Simply extraordinary, and to read that book and realize what all the areas of the brain and the nervous system is actually up to on our behalf 24/7 is utterly fascinating.
Well, I can see all the metaphors creeping in, such as fertilizing the mind and
yes,
turning it over and
yes,
watering it and
it's when you get to the pruning that it gets even more interesting.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It is quite extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Harry, something we talked about last time, I think I raised the subject of the Hate Crime Act in Scotland.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And we embarked, the three of us, didn't we, on what might or might not be deemed racist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Scottish police foresaw that when this act came into force, they would be basically overwhelmed with complaints, and that's exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Gina Umali. Hello, Gina. Nice to see you. You look far too young to be listening to old men like us, but lovely to see you. And even at the Old Firm football match yesterday in Glasgow, where even the players started fighting as usual, you know, the sectarian chants and so on were audible, as they always are.
Mm-hmm.
And the police received a huge amount of complaints about that. An article on the BBC this morning from an ex-Scottish minister said it's obvious that the Scottish Parliament, the current ministers who facilitated this, are absolutely shocked at the level of controversy it has raised.
Mm-hmm.
They raised the sort of point you raised that, you know, almost anything could now be deemed a hate crime, racist, whatever. And then on the other side, a lot of very well-respected women, not J.K. Rowling, but Baroness Kennedy and so on, they're saying you've missed a trick here because you haven't included misogyny. And I wondered whether you had any views on that.
Well, I think we've got to stand back from the whole question. We're reaching a situation of Orwellian proportion where even words are being banned. You're not allowed to use certain words. I mean, how can you have freedom of speech if there are certain words that you can't use? It's totally contradictory.
Absolutely, that's the equation, or the lack of the
they
equation.
apply a label to it. And under the Scottish Hate Act, they've decided that those words are hateful or causing damage to somebody. But the criterion that they apply is that if the person who is on the receiving end thinks they're damaging, that there's not an independent body or an accepted standard that says those words are damaging. It's how the person feels. So they can just simply say, I feel insulted, and therefore they are insulted. And therefore
Yes.
they're a victim of hate crime.
Well, actually, for once, I must very mildly correct you, because what I've discovered is that you can get a complaint, which, as you say, is obviously a subjective judgment. But the actual test that should be applied is an objective one. It's whether the old bloke on the Clapham omnibus, the reasonable man, so-called, a reasonable person, would a reasonable person find that remark or communication or behaviour within the act? So there is a level of objectivity. It's not just I complain, therefore I'm right. They have to apply that reasonable person test. So at least there's that. Mind you, who is the reasonable person? It's down to subjective judgments all along, unless it were to reach a courtroom.
But if the word in question or the phrase in question is considered offensive, that's a degree of unpleasantness. The word hate is rather extreme. We tend to use it lightly in daily conversation. People will say, oh, I hate going down that street. For some reason, they don't like going down that street as opposed to another street. Well, they don't hate it. What they mean is they prefer another street, or they don't like going down that street. But you don't hate a street. Hate is not the correct word. It's been misapplied, and therefore we need more precise definition. The language allows for that. So just because you say something that is offensive to somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean you hate them.
No, of course. Of course. I mean, there are very specific categories within this statute that, in its definition, convert behaviour or words or writings to be a level of hate. In other words, you have to manifest what a reasonable person would deem to be hate, be it ethnicity, religion, gender, whatever. But I very much take your point, as I suspect the viewer would, about hate is actually a very strong word.
An extreme word. You know, some people might say, well, I hate oranges as opposed to apples. But you can't hate an orange. You can dislike an orange. You may not want to eat it. You may prefer an apple, but you cannot hate an orange.
Actually, you've reminded me. I stopped using the word hate when I began to grow up a bit about 2 years ago. because the word is dislike.
Yeah.
You know, but you can hate people based on all sorts of levels.
You can reach a point of such intense dislike that it will eventually go over the edge into hate. But it's an
Yes.
extreme form of expression, and to apply that to anything that's unpleasant takes away the whole meaning of the word hate. It's a casual use of the word hate is where the problem is. Offensive or something like this, maybe, and various other degrees of consideration could work, but not hate. Hate is too.
Well, sorry, the Oxford English Dictionary definition I've just looked up is feel intense dislike for. Intense dislike.
Well, that in fact is fairly euphemistic, I think. Intense dislike. I would have thought, I mean, I won't go against the Oxford Dictionary, but I would have thought that hate was more than intense dislike.
Yeah, well, I can't disagree with that. I'm surprised it's such a mild definition.
Mild interpretation. Hate is a very, very strong word. And to even introduce it into legislation is, to my mind, bizarre. It does take us back, as you say, to last week's discussion about racism. You can't debate racism without being accused of being racist. You can't take a position and argue.
I totally agree with what you're saying, but I also recognize that the force of, if you want a better use, vernacular, conversational English is once a word gets purchased, you can't actually change people's understanding of it. And while I try to be as pure as I can, particularly in my written English, is I quite often am misunderstood because I'm using the word accurately. And it is interesting how it changes. For instance, how would you take the word buxom to mean?
Well, buxom means full-breasted in Old English.
No, it doesn't. In Old English, it means plain.
In modern English,
plain,
Oh,
plain looking.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the definition. I mean, that's the one that I know about because I looked it up in the past. Now it means full-breasted.
But we talk about the theft of words. There was one of the most beautiful words in the English language was the word "gay."
Yes.
Even in Christmas carols, "Don we now our gay apparel." Well, I mean, if you don your gay apparel now, you're going to dress up as a homosexual, and
Yes.
the word "gay" no longer means what it was. It has been captured and stolen and put into a totally different context.
Yes. There is still a wonderful clip which we've shown, and indeed it finds its way onto mainstream television from time to time, and that is Billy Buckland's early camping things. You know, you went to a Billy Buckland's place, which is the first whatever they call it. But anyway, across the front is a great big banner that says "Welcome to a gay weekend."
Exactly. Yeah. So there's words that have been stolen and will never be able to enter the mainstream again.
Yes,
or if they
exactly.
do, they enter into it in a totally different context.
Yeah, it's been totally appropriated, and I resent it because I mean the old films, in not so old literature, as you point out, Harry, it meant something completely different.
Yeah, but let me actually contradict myself here because language is a living thing.
Yes.
It is a tool. It shouldn't be sacred. Language is a vehicle for transmitting a message. The message itself is sacred. And the better the language that you use, the more precise the transmission of that message can be. And so, if a society evolves, language must adapt to meet the needs of the message. So, language is a living thing, it's changing all the time. We have dead languages like Latin and ancient Latin, which now just frozen in time. But the English language is changing constantly. Another recent example. We say, "Oh, we'll get that sorted for you." What we really mean in 30-year-old English, 30 years ago, to get it sorted means to put it in different slots. What we say sorted now meant sort it out. We'll get it sorted out for you. That was 20, 30 years ago only. But now we'll get that sorted for you. The word out has been dropped. So what do you do when you want to sort one pile of things from another pile of things? Where's the word for that? So it's changed. But now people would understand you if you say, we'll sort that for you, meaning they'll sort it out. So it's the message that comes across that predominates, and it's this by far the most important thing. The use of good language, precise language, helps in expressing yourself more accurately, but it shouldn't be sacred. It needs to be flexible.
Yes, well, one of the great wordsmiths was, of course, Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
He made words up.
58 words are attributed to Shakespeare, having made up 58 words he made up.
I'm not surprised. I mean, the one I remember clearly is Antony and Cleopatra, where Antony makes a threat and says, "I will unpeople Egypt."
Mm-hmm.
You know, I will, commit genocide or whatever, but I will unpeople Egypt. And, he used all these, as you say, 58, 59 words. I mean, I've just looked up your word buxom, Keith, and it's meant so many other things. Old English, Middle English. In Middle English, it meant submissive, humble, gentle, obedient. But the current meaning is, particularly in relation to a female, is plump and large-breasted.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
As Harry said. I mean, can we just return back to, you asked rhetorically, Harry, how do you define hate? And I think the three of us are rather surprised that the dictionary definition is really quite mild.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, an analogy of this occurs to me from my now ex-practice as a barrister with the charge threat to kill.
Mm-hmm.
And a threat to kill is proven if you make a threat to kill another or via a third party and you intend the victim, the target, to believe that you will carry out the threat. Mm. Well, the number of times I and other barristers got entwined with juries and judges, how many times do people say, "I could kill you for that"?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to kill you, but of course they're not meaning they will kill somebody. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, the other person knows they don't mean that.
That's correct, yeah.
But it's a very knotty subject, and it's a very, very hard charge to prove. Just literally on the words.
Well, we're trying to define emotion. We're trying to define a moving target, something that means one thing to one person and something totally different to another.
Yeah.
And this is why we're living in a mollycoddled world of wokeism, where sooner or later you won't be able to say anything. there's too much judicial control, I feel, that being imposed. And I can't understand why the Scots have done that, except there are many ways that not similar laws, but similar practices are being applied in Britain, in England, just as they are in Scotland. They've simply put it on the statute books in Scotland, which is an extreme step to take, in my opinion. How do you legislate morality? You can't.
Yeah, well, you don't. Lord Devlin, many years ago, wrote a book. No, it wasn't Lord Devlin. It was Hart. Sorry, it was a legal philosopher called Hart, and it was called Law and Morality.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole book concluded what you just concluded. You can't judge applying the law is not a moral exercise. People on juries, magistrates can apply a level of morality to their judgments.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to avoid. But the number of times I've heard judges say during a trial or at the end to a jury, you are not a court of morals.
Mm-hmm.
What you have to focus on is whether the Crown have proved this charge or these charges.
Mm-hmm.
You're not here to be moralistic about it. It's a hard-hearted, unemotional, objective decision as to whether the evidence has made you sure of guilt. And if not,
that's right.
It's not guilty.
It's a scientific interpretation of the law, precise interpretation of the law, which is what I imagine. It's your profession, not mine, but I imagine it's what the law should be all about, devoid of morality, devoid of emotion.
Absolutely.
That you should inculcate morality into people's behavior, that people should be, if you will, espouse what we commonly call basic Christian beliefs. But it doesn't mean that you should enforce Christianity beyond people's conduct.
No, I mean,
we're in a situation at the moment where it's quite ridiculous. The Church of England, through the in the form of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, are seeking to impose religious values on legal matters.
They are.
I find that very strange. I think that Christianity should, or any religion, should be separate from government. It's all very well. We've got 2 archbishops and I believe 24 senior bishops in the House of Lords. What are they doing there? They have no right to be influencing the politics of a nation. They should.
That goes back to Tudor times, Harry.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth I, Mary before her. The Lords included. I'm not saying it's right,
mm-hmm.
but we're going back many centuries, and that in which of the films is it? There's Elizabeth and there's Elizabeth the Golden Age. One of them, that's right, she's trying to get through the Houses a bill becoming a statute, obviously, that is basically a Protestant. It's not anti-Catholic, but it's a non-Catholic statute. I don't know whether it's recusancy or whatever, but anyway, there are still very pro-Catholic bishops in the Lords. And Walsingham, we talk about spin doctors these days. If you want a spin doctor stroke enforcer, you go back to Walsingham.
Yeah.
He was quite extraordinary.
Mm.
Anyway, basically, he locked up the 13 bishops. He locked them up in the basement of the house. So they were absent from the vote. It was carried, and he went downstairs, and they were released, complaining obviously, and they said, "Did the bill get passed?" And he said, "Yes, by a margin of 14 votes." So basically, his tactic was to remove them from the. I mean, I know it's highly undemocratic, but that's what he did. But even then, the bishops and archbishops were part of the House of Lords.
Well, yes, I can. I follow that. They're there for historical reasons, the traditions, if you will. But but that is a product of the fact that the dominant religion at the time that became a standard practice was Catholicism, but was Christianity.
Yes,
We're moving towards a situation which is going to be with us very, very soon, where the predominant religion in Britain is going to be Islam. Now here we go again. We're going to get on thin ice here by talking about this as if it's we could be guilty of some sort of a hate crime here, I guess. But it's just a statistical fact that we now have more Muslims going to the mosque than we have Christians going to church.
There's no doubt about that.
We have.
But stating that is not a hate crime.
We have the major part of practicing Muslims in Britain are aged 25, and the major grouping of practicing Christians is aged 50. So that means that simply by demographics, we're going to become a dominant Muslim country. The date they give for that is 2050, which is just around the corner, 25 years from now, 26 years from now, will be a Muslim country. Therefore, if we want to apply the same rules, why would we not put all of the imams and Muslim leaders into the House of Lords? And one of the reasons is because the principle of Islam is the application. One of the principles, a key principle, is the application of Sharia law.
Yeah.
So they will impose a law through political purposes, a religious law. We don't want religious laws. We don't want religious people, however genuine their views are, and how important their Christian or their moral, no, I shouldn't say Christian, moral message is to society. They have no business playing a role in politics. Welby and his band of bishops should not be in the House of Lords. You can't mix religion and politics. Otherwise, you're opening the door to the fact that 25 years from now, we will have Sharia law in politics, not by the back door, but by the front door. We don't want that. We want it separate. We want people who we elect to govern our lives, making decisions with, we hope, correct moral values, but not to make them. I mean, take this question of slavery. I mean, the church is going. The Church of England is going downhill fast, and Welby and his bunch of whatever want to take £1 billion and give it to as slave reparations, anti-slavery reparations. A nation like Britain, who did everything it could to condemn slavery. 1807, we banned it, and at 1/4 of the budget of the Royal Navy was spent over the next don't know how many years eliminating slavery.
Yes, and the government paid reparations then.
Yes, indeed. And so did a lot of British sailors. Well over 1,000 British sailors gave their lives. And the North Atlantic Squadron, or whatever it was called, trying to put down the slave ships. And slavery, what is slavery? I mean, it's something that has been there throughout time. does anybody ever talk about the slavery, the millions that were carted off from Africa to Persia and India? Does anybody talk about the Barbary pirates that would raid the coastal villages in Cornwall, Devon, Ireland? Whole towns were wiped out. The Baltimore in Ireland was totally removed off the face of the map for 100 years because the Barbary pirates took everybody away just as slaves. And the slaves from Africa were the slaves collected by the Africans themselves and sold to the Europeans. One of the biggest, I think, misnomers is when the Americans self-flagellate because of their record of accepting slavery. Relatively few of the African slaves went directly to America. There's a figure which is generally accepted of about 400,000. Now, amongst 10 million of African slaves that were carted off to the New World, virtually half of them went to Brazil. Are Brazil going to pay reparations? Are the former rulers of Africa who collected these slaves and exported them to Egypt, to anywhere else, are they going to pay reparations? Why should the British, who did everything in their power and before anybody else did to eliminate slavery, suddenly feel guilty about slavery? And it's still happening. There are still millions of slaves in the world today. Would we not be doing a better job trying to fight that? I just don't understand. And this sort of thing with the Church of England getting involved, I mean, they're totally off track. And in the meantime, the churches are decaying, the congregations are slipping down to about 5%, I think, is the attendance of the we say the nation is 46% Christian, but only 5% of the nation goes regularly to the church on Sundays.
Yes, because
And
there's no sanction. Well, in the Catholic Church, there's the sanction of the guilds, and their views on mortal and venial sin. But in the Anglican Church, there is no sanction. It's a matter of choice.
Yeah.
Whereas in Islam, well, the community pressure, I suspect, is why even their youngsters go to the mosque. You know, they almost have to be devout. But to me, it's just classic Anglican Church. It's so wishy-washy.
Well, the classic Anglican Church, which used to be the anchor of town or village life or city life to a degree, since cities are just simply a collection of villages, it's been allowed to decay. They keep creating more bishops, and there's poor vicars and priests who are struggling to run 4 or 5 parishes on their own, with their churches decaying, and there's this wizard Welby trying to give away the money that's desperately needed to keep the fabric of the church alive.
But he's not going to succeed, is he, Harry?
Well, he may not succeed, but he is a force that is pulling woke thinking and politics in a certain direction. So collectively, we're being directed, society is being directed by an increasing liberal elite who are totally out of touch with the people. The problem with politics in Britain at the moment is the Conservative Party, and as we shall soon see, the Labour Party, are totally out of touch with the people. There needs to be a change, a system, a clean out. They get elected, and then they follow all of these principles which that people don't understand. Um, so there's a very dangerous influence by people like Welby on the direction the nation is taking. Whether he gets his £1 billion reparations for the slave trade, I think you're probably right. He probably won't. But he will be pushing. Society will be moving in that direction. It still is, with the sense of collective guilt that is being posed on Britain and to a certain level on the United States and other countries. That it's the old story of the haves fighting against the have-nots, but um, that's as old as time. But no, I think very dangerous. The policies of the Church of England at the moment, and Welby in particular, are extremely dangerous for the future of British society, and certainly has no place in the House of Lords and in politics whatsoever. He should be looking after his flock, and that's the shepherds abandoned the flock with the first signs of COVID. They shut the churches and went away and hid. The shepherds left the flock to fend for themselves, and a great many of people lost loved ones, and without the comfort of the religion that was to them the fibre that held their life together. And I'm speaking as an atheist.
Yes, I know you are, as does the viewer. But I personally don't think the House of Lords should exist at all, Harry.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that?
That's a good point.
What would you put in its place?
Nothing.
Well, you see, that's where I would disagree with you, because I believe in the triple system, which was mooted by either Socrates or Plato as being the very best form of government, a combination of monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy. And actually, where there are 9 kingdoms in within our reach, Europe, if you want, where in fact they are the most stable forms of government. So not to be debated today here, but I don't say that the House of Lords in its present form, but I do think that you should have a second chamber.
Well, for the first time, I think you and I entirely disagree. The House of Lords is it's a mockery. It's a collection of unelected individuals, most of whom who are there because they donated huge amounts of money to their respective parties. They're all creatures of the government of the time, and they should have no part to play in our political system.
Mm-hmm. I think what the argument you've made there, Philip, is for the way it's constituted at the moment is wrong. People are appointed to it to give it political bias, or they're rewarded for the failure to perform, or they're rewarded for some success they've achieved. But it is obviously artificially stacked, the House of Lords. The question is, should there be a higher body that controls the inadequacies of regular political decision? In your trade, in the law business, let's think of the United States example. There is a need for a Supreme Court that should be apolitical. It should not have any political bias, though we do know that the various presidents appoint Supreme Court judges to try and influence the course of events in the future. It's heavily weighted at the moment, I think, towards the right, but it was heavily weighted towards the left previously. But there is a need for a mechanism that that can evaluate and most countries have that. we have the Constitutional Court in France. That there should be somebody who is above the politicians. It can't be the royalty, because we don't want to give royalty power. We just want them to be constitutional. We want them to occupy a space in people's hearts and minds that prevents politicians benefiting from. So we do need a structure. So what we're really talking about is, how do we constitute that structure?
Well, we've got one.
How does people become
let's take the Rwanda policy.
Yeah.
Okay. The Lords have been messing around with that for ages now.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
They've been to the Supreme Court 3 times. That's the higher authority. It's a legal authority that makes objective judgments about government policy as to whether it's humane, fair, whatever. Now, why do we need the House of Lords for that?
I agree with that, but we've also given the Supreme Court of Britain a political clout that it didn't used to have. It actually takes a stand on issues rather than interpreting the law. And from what I can see, is Lady Hale still the president of the Supreme Court of
I believe she is.
Yes, she's interesting. A little part of my life here. Her father taught me at school. Her father, father taught me at school. He was a housemaster at the grammar school that I briefly attended in my youth. But she is a very opinionated political figure. I do not see her as being dependent and somebody with the supreme responsibility to make judgments, legal judgments, when she's biased by her own personal beliefs.
She retired I'm wrong, she retired in 2020.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So I think that the Supreme Court of Britain has assumed a mother role over, not only over British jurisprudence, but over political decision. I'm very, I don't know when that happened, probably 10 years ago. I mean, you would know more about than I do, where the Supreme Court was brought into the mainstream of political judgment. Anyway,
I don't know better than you. All I remember is the Supreme Court being born out of the House of Lords in the legal sense.
Yeah.
And Lady Hale, Baroness Hale, may be an exception. I'm not aware, even within the Rwandan subject, that they became political. I got the impression that they were trying their very best to apply convention principles, legal principles of fairness and the like, to the proposed government policy. The judges at the level of the Supreme Court should not be political.
No, but many of their rulings did contain political implications, I felt.
Implications, perhaps, yeah.
They were facing a difficult situation because Britain, having theoretically withdrawn from Europe, should also have withdrawn from all of the European institutions, not the least of which is the Court of Human Rights. Well, that's not Europe, it's an independent body, but it's the same thing. We should no longer be governed by laws that are not made by Britain. The idea
in fact, we still are bound by the European Court of Human Rights.
And so the tremendous failure of the I am an unashamed Brexiteer. I wanted Britain's independence back, not to be decided by people who hate us. Is that too strong a word to use?
You mean intense dislike, don't you?
Intensely dislike us, making decisions about how we govern our country.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That's what I'd hoped for.
But then the Brexiteers, the people who brought us Brexit, didn't apply it. Boris Johnson let the side down, and wishy-washy people like Sunak, who they should just clear out. He said at one stage he was going to clear out 1,000 European laws. Then he's decided not to.
Well, only last week he claimed that he was.
Obama may take us back in, for goodness sake. So, God, that's an awful thought.
That's a dreadful thought. Only last week he asserted that he would remove from the UK the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. Well, that should have been done straight away. And I don't think, frankly, he's got the balls to do that now.
Well, that takes us back to Lady Hale. You see, that's where the link is. They were interpreting the legality of the Rwandan program based on principles that were being residual principles imposed upon us by the Court of Human Rights that we should have left automatically by no longer being part of Europe.
Yes.
And she should have seen through that. I mean, she was not thinking as a Brit. She was thinking purely in philosophical, legal terms, I guess, and so which is her job. She's not supposed to be politicized, but any decisions that they took on Rwanda were essentially political because they contradicted what the British elected representatives, the Parliament, rather incompetent as they are, but they were trying to apply a practice on behalf of the British people to stop this absolute flood of immigration. I mean, unbelievable, which is totally transforming the face of the nation. Because of that ruling of the Supreme Court, they couldn't do it. The wish of the British people was thwarted by their own judicial mechanism. I just
there is an elephant in the room here, Harry.
Yeah,
and it is a British statute, a British Act of Parliament. It's called the Human Rights Act.
Right. Yeah.
So that is enshrined in our law, and again, there was much talk, particularly post-Brexit, about repealing the Human Rights Act. But what we're left with is a two-tier system whereby a British individual can invoke the Human Rights Act domestically, and if the decision goes against him or her, you can still go off to the European Court of Human Rights.
Yes, quite, yeah.
On a slightly lighter note, you mentioned earlier in this podcast about politicians being out of touch with the people. And I mentioned that I'd been to a party on Saturday. Well, the caterers ran out of red wine, which was, for me, a complete disaster. So they went down to the co-op, the local co-op here, and replenished the wine stocks. And in the co-op in Arundel was a certain Sir Keir Starmer, who made his name in the European Court of Human Rights. So most people recognised him. It wasn't a body double, but it was Sir Keir Starmer shopping in the co-op in Arundel. So that's pretty basic stuff for a politician, isn't it?
Yeah. So going back to that point, if Brexit has it's in name only, it is not hasn't been applied. Why is Britain still beholden to decisions made by foreigners? And whose responsibility is that? The Conservatives. I mean, they should have taken all of those literally thousands of laws off the British statute book. Surely they could have had a blanket clean out of that, but they
Well,
didn't.
it was one of the major complaints that Dominic Cummings raised as he was trying to get his own back on Boris. That basically Cummings, who had effectively delivered Brexit, it wasn't being put into place.
Quite, yeah.
That was his complaint. However, the negative effects are widespread. I mean, again, at this bash I went to Saturday, the chef has two children, young adults. And he was saying that they and their generation, they're not going to Europe anymore. They're not going to Europe for like a long-term summer or anything like that, because they can't stay there more than 90 days. So they're going to the Far East. They're going to the Americas. They're going to Africa. They're going to the Antipodes, far more than they were, because Europe is too restrictive.
Well, the 90-day rule, which is, I've got a number of friends who have second homes in France, and they're constrained by the 90-day rule, which is the most ridiculous rule, because they're, for the Europeans, because of their dislike of Britain, are shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, these Brits come over here and spend money, but they're not allowed to. They've got to go back home after so many days. Otherwise, they'll exceed the what is it, 90 days per 180, isn't it? That's
yeah, it is.
And so they just and so fewer of them are buying houses. A fewer of them are spending money in France, Germany, or wherever, Spain. Just shooting themselves in the foot because of, I won't say hate, but of dislike of Britain, and a punishment for daring to leave their sacred European Union, which I'll say quite bluntly, and living here as I have in Europe for 35 years now, half my life in North America, half of my life in Europe, relatively little in Britain. The European Union is a total disaster, and it's going down the tube so fast that if Starmer wants to rejoin, it better be quick, because it's not going to exist. I mean, Germany is going to pull out very soon. They'll be fed up of paying all the bills, but they can't pay the bills anymore. Their economy is pretty much on the ropes because of the Russian situation. So no, the future of Europe is, and of course, in the upcoming European elections, it's going to swing to the right. The right-wing parties, the Rassemblement National in France, with the Front National, is they're going to probably become the largest single party in Brussels. No, so Europe is finished. It didn't work. The euro hasn't worked. You can't have a one-size-fits-all currency policies. So it just needs one more hiccup, and that'll all fold up like a house of cards. So,
is Slovakia part of the EU?
It may be one of the ones that didn't join, or if it didn't join the euro. I'm not sure.
Because I'm only asking because
not all members of European joined the euro, you know.
Which ironically Britain never did. But I mentioned Slovakia because your point about right-wing politics, their moderate female president has just been ousted,
Mm-hmm.
and a very right-wing, pro-Russian male president has been instated,
Mm-hmm.
and he is a big mate and similar thinking to the Prime Minister, and they are very pro-Putin.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're saying things like Putin has been demonized
Well, like
unfairly.
Hungary, for instance, is Hungary is
Absolutely.
Mhm. And poor old Poland is caught in the middle because they would be more sympathetic with Putin on principle, but they're first in the line of fire if he decides, well, Poland and the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are very much in line if Putin continues his expansionist policies.
Yeah.
Germany is in line. I think that if Putin decided to go for it, now that he's put his nation on a war footing, his economy on a war footing, and he did apply the full military potential that he's got, he'd walk through Germany in a matter of days.
Yes. Yes, he would.
And that's his goal, to reestablish the Russian Empire that it was. Which takes us to the biggest question of all. We've got the Ukrainians fighting our war for us in the east, and we've got the Israelis fighting our war for us in the Middle East, and we're doing everything we can to impede their progress. Well, and we haven't got the means of resisting so much, and nor do we have the fiber anymore to sacrifice our youth in a war or our economy by. I'm not very positive about the future of Europe and of Britain.
Well, you're more of a European than I am, in the sense that you've lived in Europe far more than you have in Britain.
Oh yeah, I've lived here now for 35 years. I have a strong sense of the way they think, and they do not think like us. The whole European experiment, I think, was doomed from the beginning. You're never going to make a Norwegian out of a Greek or a German out of an Italian. I mean, it's totally different philosophies.
Quite so.
And
now, gentlemen, we've been going for just over the hour. I suspect Keith is still feeling a bit under the weather, and I suggest we bid a fond farewell to our viewers and meet again next Monday.
Well, with pleasure. I've got a dental appointment on Wednesday, so I can't with you on Wednesday.
I can't. Well, yeah. I realise that. Don't worry. We can discuss off air whether we do 2 a week or what. In fact, so I'll say toodle pip.
Okay.
Not to you yet, but to the public. Unless you want to round anything off, Keith.
No, I've listened with interest, made the odd comment. I mean, broadly, I agree with most of your theses. There are a couple that I don't, which I articulated, and we agree to disagree. But generally speaking, it's been the usual very spiky and intriguing and forthright discussion.
Good. Well, hang on in there. Thank you again, Harry, very much.
You're welcome.
And I'll say goodbye to our viewers. Goodbye, viewers.
Mm-hmm.